nerdy knitters. In this video, we're looking at some basic mistakes that new knitters often make. These are really common things. It's easy to make these mistakes, and I'm going to show you what they are and how you can easily fix them. Be sure to stick around for the last one because it really focuses on something that I think new knitters often don't understand, and that's how your stitches work. And there's also a special free bonus that you can download. You'll find the link for that down below, and there's also some timestamp links if you want to jump to any point in the video. Mistake new knitters often make is right at the beginning of a new row. They see this loose and floppy stitch down here in the row below, and they think, I'll do this, and suddenly that loose and floppy stitch has disappeared. But what they've done is they've added a stitch. If they work into both legs of that stitch they just yanked up, they've turned their 20 stitch count into 21 stitches. And if you continue doing that, your fabric will start looking like this. It'll be growing outwards. So when you start a new row, the yarn should be down here. If that stitch is loose and floppy, just pull it down out of the way. You can always fix it later on. But your yarn, if you're knitting, goes down into the back and you knit that first stitch. If you're purling, it's down and to the front. And then you can purl your stitch. It does not go up and over your needle. Remember, the start of your row is always down, just like that. Don't be tempted to pull it up and make an extra stitch right at the beginning of the row. The next mistake that's also very common is the movement between knits and purls. Let's say I wanted to move, I'm knitting a row, but now I want to add some purl stitches. The normal movement is to take the yarn between the two needles, like that, and then purl a stitch. And then I want to move back. The yarn goes back between the needles. It always goes between. Do not bring it up and over. Do not bring it up and over. So you knit the next stitch. But if I forget to move back and forth between the needles, say I want to purl right here, I have to bring that up and over and then purl my stitch, which actually feels really weird to me, so I know right away it's not correct. But let's say I purled, and then I have to go back and knit. My yarn's in the front. I put my needle in, and then I have to bring my yarn up and around. And what I've done, I've added an accidental yarn over right there. Because I didn't move properly. Between knits and purls, yarn goes between the needles. You don't bring it up and over. You create a yarn over when you do that. If you do that when you're moving to the front to purl, bring it to the front, then purl your stitch, bring it to the back, and then knit your stitch. So if you end up with holes in the middle of your knitting, like that right there, it's really easy to fix. I'm going to work a few rows and we'll see how we can fix that. Okay, this is where that yarn over is. If I accidentally made that, I could drop it off right here, but I'm going to leave it there and show you how to fix it if you do that later on. Okay, I've worked a few more rows and suddenly I look down and I see, oh no, I have a hole in my work. Do I have to rip all that out to get rid of that hole? You do not. If you've created an accidental yarn over, you have a column of stitches here, you have a column of stitches here. This yarn over, there's no column of stitches underneath. You can just drop these right off. Let me work to that spot and I'll show you what I mean. And you won't drop a stitch. You're just going to get rid of that extra stitch you created. Okay, this yarn over is right here. All I need to do is drop this stitch right off and pull it out. And it stops right there because there is no column of stitches underneath it. Now, it is kind of a mess right there, and this is bulky yarn, so it's pretty obvious. But in a lighter fabric, you can just wiggle all your other stitches around and use up that excess. It's already looking better right there. And use up that excess yarn created from those yarn overs. So the hole is gone. There's still loose stitches between here, but I can go like this and work some of that extra fabric out. And that yarn over is not there anymore. Another very common mistake is, say the phone rings or the kids are yelling and you have to put your knitting down right in the middle of a row. So you pick it up later on and you assume, for whatever reason, you have to go back this way. And what you've done, if you've worked back in the wrong direction, is created an accidental short row. Now, short rows are a good thing if you intend to use them, but if your pattern doesn't call for short rows and you create one accidentally, what you do is add extra length to one side of your knitting. Now you can see right there where that happened. I was working this way and I stopped right here and I started going back in the other direction. I actually have an extra row of knitting right here. The solution for that is you just have to take out that work back to where that happened, if you do it. But to avoid doing that, there's one simple way to know where you've left off when you pick up your knitting in the middle of a row and you're not sure if you were working a right side or a wrong side row. You work back to that spot. There it is right there. You can see the big gaping hole. Okay. The solution is looking at the yarn. The last stitch you worked is attached to the stitch on your right needle, right here. So that means this needle goes in this hand, your working yarn's right there attached to the last stitch you worked. So if I'm knitting stockinette, I just have to put my work back this way and I know I'm on a right side row. If I'm following a specific pattern, I can compare what happened on my needles to my chart and see where I've left off in my pattern. But the one thing to remember, if you've put your knitting down and you're not sure which side you're on, look at your working yarn. It's attached to the last stitch you worked, which is on your right needle. You work a stitch and you move it over to your right needle. There's that working yarn. I have 2 more tricks to share, but before I do that, why not click like and subscribe down below if you like to learn how to read your stitches and get a little nerdy with your knitting. That's the goal of this channel, is to teach you to become confident and adventurous in your knitting. The next mistake I often see is with stitch mount. This is what a stitch looks like. It has a head and it has 2 legs, a right leg and a left leg. In our standard Western mounted position, it looks like this on your needle. The head's on the top, the left leg's in the back, and the right leg is in the front. In the Eastern method, it's reversed. The right leg is in the back, and the left leg is in the front. Now you can do either way, and this depends on how you twist the yarn. When you knit, you insert between those legs, and if you wrap your yarn counterclockwise, think of the tip of your needle as a clock, and you're wrapping the yarn around this way. You're producing stitches that sit on your needle with the right leg in the front and the left leg in the back. Now, if I inserted and I wrapped my yarn the other way, clockwise around there, and pull it through, now that stitch has the left leg in the front and the right leg in the back. To create a normal stitch, you want to knit right into the center. There's our stitch, both legs are there. No matter which way it's mounted, even if it's mounted this way, we want to knit into the center of that stitch. If it is mounted so that right leg is in behind, we need to knit into the back leg to keep that stitch open. Now here's a normal stitch. We knit into it like that. That keeps it open. If we knit into that back leg, we twist it closed. Now that leg is twisted one over the other, like this. When we knit into that like that, we twist it. So you have to pay attention to how you're wrapping your yarn. If you wrap this way, you're creating a normal stance for that stitch. Right leg's in the front, left leg's in the back. But if you wrap your yarn clockwise, the mount of your stitch is different. Now you have your left leg in the front. And if that happens, if you happen to do that, let's pretend I did that with this stitch. Now I've got my left leg in the front, right leg in the back. If I knit into the front of that stitch, it twists it. See what it does? That stitch is now twisted like this. So if I happen to wrap that yarn, if I happen to wrap the yarn around my needle that way and I mount the stitches in this direction where the left leg is in the front and the right leg is in the back, you need to knit right into the middle of it. No matter which way that stitch is sitting, your needle has to go in between, right into the center. If it's sitting this way, you knit into that back leg. If it's sitting in the standard position, you knit into it that way. You're always knitting into the center of that stitch to keep it open. That's another really common thing that can happen. So you really have to pay attention to what's happening on your needles. You have to look at the way the stitches are mounted. And that leads into the last tip. You have to learn to read your stitches as they sit on your needles. You have to understand how they work. So you can read them, you can see how many rows and stitches you have. In stockinette, each of these V's represents one stitch. And you can see the new row of V's is coming out of that stitch right there underneath. So I have one resource that can help you learn how to read the stitches. It's a free PDF guide that you can download. It walks you through how to read the stitches and rows, how to read the stitches on your needle. So I'll put a link for that down below and you can grab that. But this is the biggest thing you need to learn, is to understand how stitches work, how they sit on your needles, what those right and left legs are doing, so you can make open stitches when you want to, or you can make twisted stitches when the pattern calls for it. If you like this video, click the like button down below and be sure to click subscribe if you like to get nerdy with your knitting.